Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. Madison Square Garden, the home of sports and entertainment. For a rookie like me, stepping into the locker room of such an iconic venue was supposed to be a dream come true. But that night, it felt more like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The place buzzed with the usual pre-show energy, veterans joking around, rookies like me nervously checking our gear for the 100th time. I tried to focus on the excitement, but something felt off. It wasn't the nerves. I was used to that. No, this was different. It was as if the air itself was watching me. I was sitting on one of the benches, lacing up my boots when it first happened. My water bottle, which I'd placed right next to me, was suddenly on the other side of the room. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd knocked it over, and it had rolled. But when I picked it up, it was upright, standing perfectly still as if someone had deliberately set it there. I chuckled nervously, assuming one of the guys was pulling a prank. Real funny, I muttered, but no one paid attention. The lights flickered then, just for a second, enough to make everyone pause and glance upward. Old building, someone said with a shrug. I tried to convince myself they were right, but my gut told me otherwise. The flicker wasn't the random hum of old wiring. It felt deliberate. The show went on, and the locker room emptied as we all headed out for our matches. I was on the second half of the card, so I had some time to kill. The room felt unnaturally quiet once everyone else was gone. I tried to focus on stretching and running through my match in my head, but the silence was unnerving. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy kind, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes you second guess every little sound. Then the temperature dropped. I'm not talking about a draft or a sudden chill. This was bone deep cold, the kind that feels unnatural. My breath came out in visible puffs, and goosebumps erupted all over my arms. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as if someone was watching me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Or at least, it should have been. I caught the first glimpse of it in the mirror. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just behind me. I froze, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. Slowly, I turned around, expecting to see one of the guys messing with me. No one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone, but something else had appeared, a handprint. It was faint, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass and then pulled away. But the size of it was enormous, far bigger than any normal hand. Okay, I said aloud, try to calm myself down. It's just my imagination. That's all. But I didn't believe my own words. I grabbed my gear and left the room, trying to shake off the feeling. I told myself I was just tired, that the pressure of performing at Madison Square Garden was getting to me. But the truth? Deep down, I knew something wasn't right with that room. After the show, I mentioned it to one of the veterans, a guy who'd been with WWE for over a decade. His face went pale when I brought up the handprint. "You saw it?" he asked, his voice low. "Saw what?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "The shadow," he said, "in the mirror." When I nodded, he let out a long breath and sat down. "You're not the first," he said. "Years ago, a wrestler died in that very locker room. Heart attack, right after a match. They say his spirit never left. I laughed nervously, hoping he was joking, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't. Why does no one talk about this? I asked. Because no one wants to scare the rookies, he said with a shrug. But trust me, kid, you're not the first to see him, and you won't be the last. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow in the mirror, felt the cold grip of fear in my chest. I started asking around, subtly at first, not wanting to seem like I was losing it. The stories were always the same. Flickering lights, sudden drops in temperature, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. One guy told me he'd heard footsteps when he was alone in the room, heavy boots echoing on the tiled floor. Another swore he'd seen the shadow pass right through a locked door. The scariest part? Every single one of them mentioned the handprint on the mirror. I avoid that locker room now. Even when we're back at Madison Square Garden, I find an excuse to change somewhere else. Some of the guys laugh and call me superstitious, but I don't care. I know what I saw, and I know I'll never forget the icy grip of fear that night. The veterans were right. The shadow is still there, lurking in the corners, waiting for the next unsuspecting rookie to catch a glimpse of him in the mirror. If you ever find yourself alone in that locker room, do yourself a favor, don't look in the mirror. And if you see the handprint, get out while you still can. Story 2. The arena had that unmistakable smell of spilled soda, stale popcorn, and sweat. The kind of smell that clings to the walls of every small-town venue that's been around long enough to see its share of greats and washouts. I just finished a grueling night. 6 matches, 3 autograph sessions, and a meet and greet that had dragged on for what felt like forever. All I wanted to do was collapse in my car and drive back to the hotel. I was halfway across the parking lot when I realized it. My phone was still sitting in the locker room. Typical. The one thing I can't live without, and I'd left it behind like an idiot. The arena was quiet when I stepped back inside. Eerily so. Most of the crew had already packed up and left, and the janitors were probably on their smoke breaks. The sound of my boots on the concrete floor echoed back at me, a hollow clopping that seemed unnaturally loud. I passed the concession stands, their shutters pulled down tight, and made my way toward the backstage area. That's when I heard it, the sound that stopped me dead in my tracks. Clap, clap, clap. It wasn't the kind of polite applause you'd hear at the end of a performance. No, this was slow and deliberate, like someone congratulating a job well done, or mocking me. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the main arena. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, grab my phone, and get out of there. But curiosity has always been my Achilles heel. Maybe it was one of the crew messing around, or a fan who'd somehow stayed hidden after the event. I needed to know. The doors to the main arena creaked as I pushed them open, the sound reverberating like a gunshot in the empty space. The air was colder here, heavy in a way that made my skin prickle. The arena lights were off, except for a single spotlight shining down on a seat about halfway up the stands. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was someone sitting there, a man, or at least the silhouette of one. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing back to me. "We're closed." The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. "You're not supposed to be here." Still no response. Then, as I took another step, the figure slowly stood up. The light caught him just enough for me to see his outline, tall and wiry, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He raised his hands and clapped twice, the sound sharp and deliberate, and then he vanished, not walked away or slipped into the shadows. He was just gone. 1 second he was there, and the next the spotlight was shining on an empty seat. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps, and my chest felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The silence in the arena was deafening, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I don't remember running back to the locker room, but somehow I found myself there, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. I didn't even bother to turn off the lights. I just bolted, sprinting through the halls and out to the parking lot as fast as my legs would carry me. The next morning, I told the crew about what I'd seen. Most of them laughed it off, teasing me about how I'd probably imagined it after too many energy drinks. But one guy, a grizzled veteran named Jim, didn't laugh. He just nodded, a grim look on his face. "That was his seat," Jim said, his voice low. "Whose seat?" I asked, still jittery. "The Phantom fan," he said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Guy used to come to every show. Never missed a single one. He'd always sit in that same seat, front and center, clapping louder than anyone else. He died last year. Heart attack during a match. They say his spirit never left. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "You're lucky he didn't follow you out," Jim added, almost as an afterthought. I didn't sleep that night. Weeks later, I found myself back at that same arena for another show. This time, I made a point to avoid the stands altogether. But as I stood backstage, waiting for my cue, I heard it again. Clap, clap, clap. The Phantom fan's seat may be empty, but he's still watching. And if you ever find yourself alone in an old arena late at night, listen carefully. You might hear him too. Story 3. After a grueling night in the ring, I was running on fumes. The event had gone longer than expected, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been through a meat grinder. By the time I made it to the hotel, it was well past midnight. The place was called the Windsor Inn, a tired-looking structure with peeling paint and flickering neon signage. The kind of hotel that screamed budget-friendly but whispered, "Don't stay here." As I trudged up to the front desk, the clerk barely looked up. His name tag read Phil, and he had the dead-eyed stare of someone who'd seen too much. "Checking in," I said, dropping my bag on the counter with a thud. Phil glanced at the computer screen and clicked his mouse a few times. "Room 1307, he said, handing me a key card. There was something odd about the way he said it, like he'd just given me bad news and didn't want to stick around for the fallout. I noticed a brief pause as he handed me the card. "Anything I should know about the room?" I asked, half joking. Phil shrugged, his lips twitching into a nervous smirk. "It's quiet." It wasn't until I got into the elevator that I realized what floor I was on. The 13th. Superstitions never bothered me much. I'd spent too many nights in grimy motels and strange cities to care. But something about it gave me a twinge of unease. The elevator groaned as it climbed, the overhead light flickering. When the doors opened, the hallway was dim, the kind of dim that felt deliberate, like the place was trying to keep secrets. I found my room at the end of the corridor. The door had scratches near the lock, jagged and deep, like someone had been desperate to get inside, or maybe to get out. I told myself it was probably luggage scuffs. People tend to drag their suitcases around carelessly. The room itself was nothing special. Beige walls, a worn carpet, a bed that sagged in the middle. A large mirror hung above the dresser, reflecting the faint yellow glow of the bedside lamp. I tossed my bag in the corner and flopped onto the mattress, too tired to care about anything else. I must have fallen asleep within minutes, but my rest didn't last long. I woke up to a sound, faint at first, a whisper, soft and fleeting, like wind sneaking under a door. My eyes snapped open, and I lay there, straining to hear. The sound grew louder. It wasn't the wind. It was voices. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked toward the door. The whispers seemed to be coming from just outside. I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled to the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The whispers stopped as soon as I opened the door. I told myself it was late-night paranoia. Maybe the AC vent was playing tricks on me. I locked the door and went back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin like a kid hiding from the monster under the bed. But the whispers came back. This time, they were louder, closer, and they weren't outside the door. They were inside the room. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and my skin prickled with goosebumps. The sound wasn't just whispers. It was a conversation, multiple voices murmuring in hushed, frantic tones. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. The room was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy like something unseen was pressing down on me. That's when I noticed the mirror. The glass was fogged over, even though the room wasn't humid. My eyes locked on the faint outlines of letters scrawled in the condensation. Slowly, the message became clear. Get out. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. Who's there? I croaked, my voice shaking. Silence. Then, as if in response, the bedside lamp flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and bolted for the door. My hands fumbled with the lock as the whispers rose into a crescendo, a cacophony of angry, pleading voices. When I finally got the door open, I sprinted down the hall without looking back. The elevator seemed to take forever, and I swore I could feel something watching me, following me. The lobby was eerily quiet when I burst out of the elevator. Phil was still at the desk, sipping coffee. He didn't look surprised to see me. Room 1307, he asked before I could say anything. I nodded, breathless. You're not the first guest to leave in the middle of the night, he said casually, as if it were a normal occurrence. Why the hell didn't you warn me? I snapped. Phil shrugged, his face unreadable. Would you have believed me? I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight to the next town, my hands gripping the wheel like my life depended on it. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that room. All I know is, if you ever find yourself at the Windsor Inn and they give you room 1307, don't stay.